Everybody, it's Peter Schiff. It is Monday, November 1st, 2010. Well, this morning we got some economic news on personal income and spending. Personal income actually dropped by 0.1%, yet spending was up by about 0.2. Now, these numbers were lower than expected, but still, what it shows me is that even though incomes are stagnating, consumers are still spending when what we really want them to do is save more. And also, with energy prices up today, up $1.50 a barrel, I think $83 a barrel. The CRB index hit a new 52-week high again today. One of the things that people are going to be spending more money on is basic food and energy, which means they're going to have less money to spend on other things. This whole decline in spending, which is a good thing, right? We want people to spend less and save more. Paul Krugman had another piece today in his editorial, where he wrote he's criticizing the people who are asking for government to cut spending. And of course, Paul Krugman is warning that we're going to have a much deeper recession because we're not following his advice. Now, he's going to end up being right, but for the wrong reasons. We are going to have a worsening recession, but not because the government isn't spending enough, but because it's spending too much. See, the way Krugman looks at things, he says that, yes, it makes sense for individuals to spend less because they are in debt. They have to start rebuilding their savings. But where he's wrong is he says that means government has to pick up the slack, that if Americans aren't going to spend, that the government has to go into debt and spend, because Krugman says that when one person spends, somebody else generates an income, and if spending is contracting, then people's incomes are falling, and we can't have an economic recovery if people are saving. Well, what Krugman doesn't understand is what happens to the money that's saved. It doesn't get saved in a mattress. When somebody deposits money into a bank, the bank has money to lend, which it lends to entrepreneurs, to businessmen that spend the money on capital investments. They buy equipment, they buy tools and machines, which produce things and provide employment opportunities. So that's what you get when you have more savings. You have more economic growth, you have more productivity, you have more jobs. When the government borrows that money and spends it instead, which is what Krugman is advocating, then you don't get a recovery. You just have government squandering the savings of individuals, which is undoing the benefit. In other words, what the private sector builds up in the form of higher savings, the government simply tears down. If you look at some of the countries that are saving the most, like China, like Singapore, these are two countries that are saving better than 30% of their income, yet their economies are growing by 10% a year or more. So if Paul Krugman is right, if savings is a drain on growth, then China and Singapore should be in massive recessions. They're not, because savings is generating a growth, not the other way around. I also happened to catch 60 Minutes last night. I don't know if any of you saw that. You can see it on the internet. But it was interesting. They went to a town where that was particularly hard hit by the recession. And I'm trying to find the name of the town. I wrote it down somewhere. Newton, Iowa. And in any event, I thought it was very interesting. First of all, they were speaking to a group of people, and they all seemed to want help from the government to get out of this recession. But what they really need is the government to stop helping, because it's all this government help that has caused the recession. The only thing the government can do to help is to get out of the way, is to remove all the barriers to economic growth that the government has erected. That would help, but it didn't seem that anybody could understand that. I think one of the most poignant segments or parts of the segment where they interviewed a guy that owned a pizzeria. And the guy who owned the pizzeria, I think he had reduced his workforce from 24 people to maybe 7 or 8 people, or I forget the reduction, but it was pretty significant. But he was working 82 hours a week himself. He was washing the dishes himself. He was doing all the things that he used to pay people to do. Now, the question is, with all these unemployed people out there, why is this guy working 82 hours a week? The reason is he can't afford to hire people. Why can't he afford to hire people? Because the wages are too high, because the minimum wage law is too high, because of all the extra costs associated with employing people. This entrepreneur, this restaurant owner cannot hire people. So here he is working the equivalent of 2 jobs when there are plenty of young kids who are unemployed who I'm sure would be willing to work for this particular pizzeria if only the government would allow it. but unfortunately they wouldn't. And then the most ironic part about the whole 60-minute segment is that they followed this segment with another segment where they thought the solution to our problems was taxing the rich. And they interviewed, David Stockman, who was a Reagan advisor, and his whole thing is we need higher taxes on the rich. Yeah, we need higher taxes like a hole in the head. And, he was trying to describe why is it that the rich, right, don't want higher taxes. And the answer was, well, that they're greedy. Well, first of all, I don't know, is it greedy to want to keep what you've earned and to be able to spend it as you see fit, invest it as you see fit, to give it to the charities that you want to? But the whole idea that people don't understand, I mean, I already pay a lot of my money in taxes, and I don't believe for 1 minute that if I pay more, that any of our problems are going to be solved. In fact, I am confident that the more of my money goes to Washington, the worse the economy is going to get, the more damage the government is going to do with that money. There are so many reasons that I don't want the government to take my money, but I know that giving them more of my money or allowing them to take more of my money is not going to help the economy. It's actually going to hurt the economy. Now, I was watching on some of these Sunday talk shows this morning. They were talking about the elections coming up, and they had Republicans and Democrats. And again, it's very frustrating. First of all, one of the Democratic senators, and I forget his name, who was on the ABC show, basically what he was saying is he was accusing that we don't want to go back to the Republicans if we elect the Republicans, because we'll go back to the very policies that caused the financial crisis, the very policies that got us into this mess. That's what Republicans want to go back to. I mean, where does this guy think he is? I mean, what policies is he talking about? We haven't abandoned the policies that got us into this mess. That's the point. Obama is doing exactly what Bush did. It's the same policies. Nothing has changed except the size of the mistakes. Obama is doing everything that Bush did, only more of it. So if that's the kind of change he was talking about, that, Bush was pursuing these anti-free market, big government policies, just he wasn't doing it big enough, and now we're doing it bigger under Obama. I would have loved to have asked this guy, exactly which failed policy of the past does he think that we want to go back to? I want to know what Bush policy was abandoned. I mean, I can't think of anything. We're doing everything he did. And I think the most frustrating element of this show was the way this Republican senator described tax cuts. He basically, when arguing against the tax cuts, and there was a Republican guy there on the show who couldn't even make this point, which was even more frustrating. The Democratic senator said that the Republicans say that they want to reduce government spending, yet they want to spend $4 trillion to give tax cuts to the rich. You hear that? They want to spend $4 trillion on tax cuts, as if tax cuts count as spending. That's not spending. That's not taking. Right? You have the government spending is when the government gives money to somebody who didn't earn it. Right? When the government cuts somebody's taxes, when they reduce taxes, that's not spending. That's tax cuts. Spending is when you're sending somebody a check that they didn't earn. And if you're giving them a bigger check, that's increased spending. But somehow, the Republicans are allowing Democrats to categorize tax cuts as spending. So now they can criticize Republicans for wanting to be reckless spenders because they want to allow people to keep their own money. Right? That's not spending, that's taxing. What we really need is spending cuts. We need to reduce the size of government spending. No, I agree, right? To talk about tax cuts and not talk about spending cuts is disingenuous, because the government then is going to finance government spending through another means. So instead of financing it through taxation, they finance it through borrowing or inflation or some combination. But to try to categorize the act of cutting taxes as spending, as if 100% of what I earn belongs to the government, and whatever they let me keep counts as money they spent, that is nonsense. Right? The reason that we need less government is so we can have more economic growth, so we can have more freedom, so we can have more prosperity. These are mutually exclusive terms. Anyway, I know I'm giving this video blog today on the day before the election, so I will probably be back again maybe on Wednesday and comment on what happened in the elections. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other people commenting. And remember, stay tuned tonight, tomorrow, all week. If you're not watching or listening, rather, to my daily radio show on the internet, it's schiffradio.com. My last name, SCHIFF radio.com. Make sure and tune in. I do this show every night live for 2 hours from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure and check it out. Take care. Bye-bye.